News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman. Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei says in a written statement that American military bases in the Middle East will no longer be safe, while also declaring victory in the war against the U.S. and Israel. Despite American and Israeli attacks on Iranian air defense sites as well as mine-laying ships in recent days, the U.S. and Iran have indicated they're closing in on an interim deal that would extend the current ceasefire and be followed by more detailed talks on Iran's nuclear program and U.S. sanctions. Meanwhile, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander James Stavridis says the Strait of Hormuz needs to reopen as part of any deal.
I've sailed that strait close to 100 times in command and as a junior officer. It's tough navigation when you're before you get into drones attacking you and sea mines. So there's going to be a lot of work to do to get it open, but it has to be opened.
Retired Admiral James Stavridis is now a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. He was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the IDF struck the new leader of Hamas's military wing in Gaza, Mohammed Odeh, who is considered one of the architects of the October 7th massacre. Odeh had been appointed around a week ago, replacing Ezzedine al-Haddad, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike 2 weeks ago. President Trump says in a Truth Social post that his latest physical at Walter Reed National Medical Center went, quote, perfectly. Trump, though, did not provide any details on the results of his exam. The visit to the medical center was his fourth publicly disclosed medical appointment since the start of his second term and his third known meeting with a dentist this year. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson says we still won't know much about the president's health weeks before his 80th birthday.
The readout that we probably will get this afternoon will say, you know, he's the strongest president who's ever been in office and he's exceptional and all that. And so we really won't know what is happening with our about to turn 80 president, even though we see the rash, we see the bruising, we see the swelling.
That's Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. We have a new read on the consumer from the Conference Board. Dana Peterson is the Conference Board's chief economist.
Current situations were worse in terms of their optimism. That includes the business outlook as well as jobs available. They were a little bit more optimistic about business and labor 6 months from now, but we're still concerned about income, which is actually a bit new because typically they say that their incomes are okay.
Conference Board Chief Economist Dana Peterson was a guest on Bloomberg Intelligence. The Trump administration is set to allow Volvo to continue operating in the U.S. after a ban on connected vehicles and related technology from China takes effect. That's according to U.S. officials familiar with the matter. The automaker is majority owned by China's Zhejiang Geely Holding Group. Sweden-based Volvo both builds vehicles in the U.S. and imports them from other countries. Volvo ADR is rising to a session high, up a little over 3%. Texas Republican voters are heading to the polls today to vote in a primary for a U.S. Senate seat, with the incumbent John Cornyn fighting to continue his nearly 24-year career in Washington after President Trump endorsed his rival, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Final votes are expected around 9 p.m. Eastern Time, with the results after that. The race has become one of the most expensive in Senate history, with around $23 million spent on media. Federal judges have ruled that Alabama's congressional candidates must run under the 2024 maps, which led to 2 Democratic victories in the state's 7 districts because the state intentionally discriminated against black voters in violation of the 14th Amendment. Alabama's new map would have likely yielded just 1 Democratic victory. Litigation has been filed challenging new maps enacted in other states as well, such as Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, as Republicans look to bolster its chances of keeping control of the U.S. House. Eli Lilly is buying 3 clinical stage vaccine developers for as much as $3.8 billion. The agreements give the pharma giant access to novel technology and experimental immunizations for shingles, common bacterial pathogens, and Epstein-Barr virus. With the acquisitions, Lilly is establishing itself as a major player in infectious diseases to go along with its dominance in the obesity drug market. The U.S. Supreme Court has refused to let Florida file a lawsuit accusing California and Washington of making it too easy for undocumented immigrants to get commercial driver's licenses. The justices on Tuesday rejected without explanation Florida's bid to sue its fellow states directly in the Supreme Court, as states can do under some circumstances to protect their sovereign interests. Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito dissented. Shares in Micron surged by 19% to surpass $1 trillion in market value. The chipmaker has recently become one of the most important companies in the AI trade, with high demand for its memory chips. Meanwhile, Qualcomm has reached a deal with ByteDance to supply chips for AI data centers. ByteDance is set to procure millions of Qualcomm chips known as application-specific integrated circuits, which will help support the social social media company's AI agent software. Qualcomm shares rising by close to 4.5% on the news. We check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow ending the day down 0.25%. The S&P 500 finished up 0.6%, while the Nasdaq gained 1.2%. The 10-year Treasury yield stands at 4.490%, while the 2-year yield is at 4.048%. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.